Well, hello, we're continuing in John's Gospel, chapter 5. We've had the incident where the man healed at the pool, who thought he needed to get into the pool to be healed. But a word from Jesus is quite sufficient to do the task. And we'll read from the very end of verse 9, as it kind of continues onto this, up to, let's go to 18. Reading from the ESV as usual. Now, that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is a Sabbath, and it's not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterwards Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So we see here that the conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders, when it says the Jews, very often in John's Gospel, it means the religious leaders and those associated with them. But we see the beginning of the conflict, the serious conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders. And again, if you look at the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels and John's Gospel, we see that so often the conflict occurred around and on the Sabbath. So we'll have a little look at some of the things about the Sabbath to try and get a better understanding of that. Now, we know that Jesus said one day that God gave the Sabbath for us. It's meant to be a benefit to us, that we had rest. What had happened was the religious leaders, the rabbis and so on over the years, had built up a whole raft of regulations and definitions of exactly what the Sabbath meant, what it meant to work on the Sabbath. So instead of being a benefit to people, it became a burden. And we can see that phenomenon often happening, not just with religious people, but just generally in society. Something that ostensibly may be good, we then build up a whole raft of regulations and rules, and the whole thing becomes a nightmare. Anyway, getting back to the situation here. So, the man who's been healed has been carrying his mat or his bed, and that, under the Jewish interpretation, meant he was working. And we see how legalism can blind us. The man's been healed. He was crippled for years. And now he can walk. We should be rejoicing. Instead, the religious leaders are criticising. And the man himself doesn't seem a particularly good fellow. Nothing particularly admirable about him. No evidence he's actually shown faith at any point. And ask him, "Well, who healed you?" He had no idea, because Jesus had withdrawn. Now, sometimes Jesus almost seems to deliberately seek out conflict. Other times he doesn't. Like here, Jesus made no effort to cause or encourage conflict here. However, afterwards it says Jesus sought out the man, or found the man, implying that he sought him out, because he had an important message for him. The man was just delighted he was healed. Jesus had something more important to tell him. He said, "Go and sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." That being healed is good, but our biggest problem is sin. And after this had happened, the man went away and went to the religious authorities. He wanted to keep in with the religious authorities. He said, "It's Jesus who healed me." He said, "There's nothing particularly admirable about this guy." Look, if Jesus heals us, it doesn't make you a better person. Anyway, then let's read 16 to 18 again and just get a better feeling about why, or part of the reason at least, why this was causing such conflict. This was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them. Doesn't say exactly when this happened. My Father is working until now, and I am working. This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Now, if you go back to Genesis chapter 2, that at the beginning, you know that it says there that on the seventh day God rested from his work of creation. Now, the general Jewish understanding was they knew full well that God had not been idle ever since. God was working all the time. He's sustaining the whole universe all the time. So God, in a sense, God was allowed to work on the Sabbath, if you can put things very loosely, crudely like that. And Jesus says the Father is working until now. They all accepted that. Wasn't a problem. And I am working. So Jesus here is claiming equality with God. Well, no, he's not claiming, he knows he's the Son of God. He knows he's equal with God. So there's a natural consequence. Father's always working. I'm allowed to always work. It says, this is why the Jews were persecuting out to kill Jesus, because he was claiming equality with God. There's some people who say, all this Jesus being divine, being the Son of God stuff, this was invented many years later. Complete nonsense. Not an ounce of evidence for it. Jesus knew he was the Son of God from the very beginning. He knew it in eternity, long before the world was created. You see in the incident where he's in the synagogue, he's about 12 years old, and he's conversing with the rabbis there, and his parents wondering where he is. He said, did you not know I should be about my Father's business? Jesus always knew who he was. And his divinity, his being the Son of God, was there right from the beginning. It's not something which is added on to the Gospels later on. So the conflict is starting to build. Amen.